Well, good morning to everyone. It's good to see everybody. We have another wonderful day that we've been blessed with to assemble together and to study some more from the book of Matthew and studying the life of Christ. We are in Matthew 25, so we are fast approaching 26, 27, that of the Passover, the establishment of the Lord's Supper, the trial, if you can even call it that, which will take place, that will condemn the Son of God to death. But before getting to all of that, we have this event that is transpiring, and as we said, this has been something that started in Matthew chapter 23 all the way through this chapter of chapter 25, that this is upon Jesus' involvement in Jerusalem, going into the temple. He is involved in teaching, and that specifically to Peter, Andrew, James, and John, specifically as they are involved in this discourse. So as we are considering, as we just said, we're moving fast into the crucifixion. And what is it that Jesus is involving himself in before he's going to die?
Other than teaching?
No, that's it. He is hard fast in teaching and getting these individuals ready for what's ahead. He's gone through in Matthew chapter 24 and discussing the destruction of Jerusalem, what that's going to look like, and the things that are going to be involved in it, thus be ready. In chapter 24, verse 36, he then switches his analogy to warn the church that this isn't something that just the Jews in Jerusalem are needing to watch out for. You need to watch. That the condemnation that is coming upon them can also come upon you. And that there is another judgment that is coming to take place. So be prepared. And that in this teaching, and as Jesus in his fashion has been up to this point, he is teaching through parables. So there are three parables that Jesus presents to Peter, Andrew, James, and John. Matthew 24, 42 through 51. And that of the household, and the wise servants, and the evil servants. And how that inside of the kingdom, emphasizing these characteristics and these qualities of the kingdom, the church, and the household of God, in that parable you have caring service that is being emphasized. This is what he's coming back to find. He wants you involved in helping others, therapy for others, and not drunkenness and reveling and abusing and beating your fellow servants. Chapter 25, 1 through 13, and that is the parable of the 10 virgins, the 5 wise, the 5 foolish, emphasizing being prepared. There's no need to be caught off guard. Going about the things that Jesus said we're supposed to be doing, and even in the illustration of they're waiting for the bridegroom to come, but it was a while off in which he came, and even then, need to be prepared no matter how long you find yourself involved in waiting. And then we have our parable for today, and that being the parable of the talents. Matthew 25, 14 through 30. I don't have it in the PowerPoint just because it saved me time in prepping, so we'll just read it together. If you have your Bibles, hopefully you do. You're already there in Matthew chapter 25. So Matthew 25, 14, for the kingdom of heaven is as a man traveling into a far country, who called his own servants and delivered unto them his goods. And unto one he gave 5 talents, to another 2, and to another 1, to every man according to his several ability, and straightway took his journey. Then he that had received the 5 talents went and traded with the same, and made them other 5 talents. Likewise he that had received 2, he also gained other 2. But he that had received 1 went and digged in the earth, and hid his Lord's money. After a long time the Lord of those servants cometh, and reckoneth with them. And so he that had received 5 talents came and brought other 5 talents, saying, Lord, thou deliverest unto me 5 talents. Behold, I have gained beside them 5 talents more. His Lord said unto him, Well done, thou good and faithful servant. Thou hast been faithful over a few things, I will make thee ruler over many things. Enter thou into the joy of the Lord. He also that had received 2 talents came and said, Lord, thou deliverest unto me 2 talents. Behold, I have gained 2 other talents beside them. His Lord said unto him, Well done, good and faithful servant. Thou hast been faithful over a few things. I will make thee ruler over many things. Enter thou into the joy of the Lord. Then he which had received the 1 talent came and said, Lord, I knew thee, that thou art a hard man, reaping where thou hast not sown, and gathering where thou hast not strawed. And I was afraid, and went and hid thy talent in the earth. Lo, there thou hast that is thine. His Lord answered and said unto him, Thou wicked and slothful servant, thou knewest that I reap where I sowed not, and gathered where I have not strawed. Thou oughtest therefore to have put my money to the exchangers, and then at my coming I should have received mine own with usury. Take therefore the talent from him, and give it unto him which hath 10 talents. For unto every one that hath shall be given, and he shall have abundance. But from him that hath not shall be taken away even that which he hath. And cast ye the unprofitable servant into outer darkness. There shall be weeping and gnashing of teeth. Now, this parable stresses the responsibilities that we have. There's caring service. There's a need of being prepared. And then we have being illustrated and shown to us that what it is that you have been put in charge of, you must act on this, or you're going to be punished. Now again, just to lay out what it is that we're discussing here, and noticing the change of direction, the change of subject matter. We're no longer talking about Jerusalem for the kingdom of heaven. When Jesus begins his parables, he begins in this fashion and discussing the kingdom of heaven. He's referencing the church. Focus on Christians at this point. Not Judaism. Not Israel. We're not looking on the outside. Oh yeah, well this applies to him, her, and the other person. No, we're applying this to us. This starts here. The kingdom of heaven is as a man traveling into a far country who called his own servants. That's us. So we need to look at ourselves. Think about us. We are examining ourselves today. Notice, and he delivered unto them his goods. It's not theirs. It's his. So it's the same illustration that we have with the servants back in Matthew 24. The Lord of the house giving over to those servants inside of the house. What you have being presented here, as is clearly illustrated with the word servant, is the idea of stewardship. And a steward is somebody who is in charge of someone else's property. You have authority, but you don't have the ultimate authority. These things are not yours, though you have to tend to them in care of someone else. So again, that's just like Matthew 24, 45 through 51. Unto one he gave 5 talents, to another 2, and to another 1, to every man according to his several ability, and straightway took his journey. Now it's amazing to me that when you listen to a lot of sermons or even class material on this parable and on this subject matter, it's amazing to me how many of our brethren get distracted and they start wanting to talk about the talents as being the talents that we have, and that God gives to individuals the talents that they have. Talents is talaton in the Greek. A certain weight, and thence a coin, or rather a sum of money. God does not give talents like Jordan has the talent to play guitar or anything else like that. God doesn't give you that. That's not in the text. God gives the sum, the goods, the money, based upon, according to his several ability. Based on what you are able to do. So when we are considering, and when you do some digging into, which I'll just go ahead and ask it, anybody do any digging as to how much this would actually be?
I remember we did it a long time ago, but I can't remember the number.
6,000 denarii for 1 talent.
Okay. So 6,000 denarii, which is the Roman currency. And during the time frame of different individuals that wrote their commentaries, for example, like Adam Clarke, and he wrote way back in history, talents, and especially if this were in silver, would equate to about 1,560 some odd dollars. But that's back in like 1900s, possibly even into the 1800s, to where $1,000 really was $1,000. This is a huge sum of money.
My New American Standard thing over here says about 15 years' wages.
Okay,
Of labor.
all right. So the American Standard in the footnote adds in about 15 years' wages. That is huge. And especially considering, so just think about this from this standpoint. A lot of these individuals that are working during this time frame, they're working day to day. With the parable that Jesus gave of going out and calling laborers and giving them a penny a day, that's how they worked from day to day. And now here the owner, the master, comes along to his servants and says, okay, I'm giving you this amount of money, this much money, see to it. Tend to it. Now just consider the fact that we're about to go further. The 5-talent man adds 5 more talents. So now you got 30 years worth of wages being brought in. This is huge stuff that we're dealing with. But this is being based upon that person's ability. So, here we have being illustrated, God gives the substance to His servants. And that we have been put in trust of these things. Now, what this is illustrating by the sum of money or these goods that are being given, you take into consideration like 1 Thessalonians chapter 2 and verse 4. How it is that we have been put in trust of the gospel. God has left that with us. He has entrusted us with that to do with it what we're supposed to. You then also think about Acts chapter 20 and verse 28 in describing the church and how that there are overseers, there are elders that are to oversee, to look after, to watch over, and to feed the flock of God. You are watching over somebody else's possessions.
You just think, well, that doesn't apply to us because that's the elders.
Oh, right, yeah.
That's where the 1 talent comes.
Right, yeah, for sure. Definitely a lack of ability there. So His goods are the responsibilities of the kingdom that are put in charge of His servants. Now look at this. Here is the owner, the master of the house, calling his servants, and he is divvying this out. He is delegating his goods and his possessions based upon each individual's ability. What does God know about each and every one of us?
More than we do.
God knows what we're capable of.
It says in 2 Thessalonians, or 1 Thessalonians 2, verse 4, who tests our hearts.
Yeah.
So that's how much God knows us. He knows the heart, and He'll test it. Right there, it's not going to be easy. He's still going to give you that work to do, but just in 1 Thessalonians, the scripture that you just gave.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And definitely the piece that Jamie put on it is a key factor too. He knows more about us than we do ourselves. And that you put yourself here in this position of the 5-talent man. 15 years' wages. You're being put in responsibility. It's like, whoa, hold on a minute. Let's back this thing up. But no, God knows what He's doing. The 2-talent man. So just, back that down some. If you're looking at 15 years, let's say this is 5 years worth of wages. Possibly more. And it's just, whoa, what a responsibility. And thus Jesus is illustrating to His apostles, and He's illustrating to us. This is a lot of responsibility that we're saying we're wanting to take on. And there is the reality of you're fit for doing something. Now here enters in the next line of questioning. Are you meeting God's expectation? Now notice, I didn't say we. Are we meeting God's expectation? This is not a we illustration. This is a you illustration. This is a view of the church as the individual. Are you, as a child of God, as a Christian, meeting God's expectation of what we're supposed to be doing? Every Christian has ability, without excuse. Nobody gets to approach the throne of God and say, well, I just couldn't. No. What are you doing with what God has given? And looking at some of the other parables, remembering the other parables, are we helping? Are we involved in therapy? Or are we involved in hurting? Well, a lot of that's going to come into play as we start investigating, we start examining what it is we've been given. And how we're handling what we've been given. As with the 10 virgins, are we ready? Are you prepared to go about and do what is needing to be done? Or you like those 5 foolish that are lazy, not looking ahead, not thinking ahead, and thus find themselves having to play catch up when the time comes. But as we go through this parable, we're going to be given some key phrases and some key words to help us in not being overburdened by the responsibility. Okay, we said this is a great deal of responsibility. But then we also have being emphasized inside of the parable. The emphasis is on faithfulness with what you have, not perfection. Matthew 24:45. Jesus begins this section. Who then is a faithful and wise servant? And this thought process will be shown throughout this parable as well. Now, why this is important is because too many of us inside of the brotherhood get this idea of perfection in mind. And that if I cannot do something perfectly, then what?
Worthless.
You don't do it at all. You don't even try. And what we're being shown with this parable, with the sowing of the seed, you just got to try. So let's see that played out for us. Let's let our teacher, the master teacher, present this for us. Verse 16. Then he that had received the 5 talents went and traded with the same and made them other 5 talents. Here's increase. Here's a bringing in. After a long time. So that goes back to the parable of the virgins. He extended or he overstayed what they were planning him to be gone, and they needed more oil. So after a long time, the Lord of those servants cometh and reckoneth with them. A reckoning is to give an account. The same word is translated that way in Matthew 18, I believe it's verse 23, with the king and the unjust servant who had the great debt. He came to give account of his servants. And so he that had received 5 talents came and brought other 5 talents, saying, Lord, thou deliverest unto me 5 talents. Behold, I have gained beside them 5 talents more. The sum of money is given to the individual, and notice, the individual comes before the Lord to give account. What we're being shown here is that there must be increase with what we're doing. To be given such a great amount and a great responsibility, putting that to use, and then when the time of reckoning comes, we will be able to stand before the Lord saying, here's what you gave me, but hey, I actually increased. As we saw with the sowing of seed on good ground, it produces fruit. But as we are considering this and we're thinking about this adding of 5 talents more, the production of fruit, we think about that in the terms of evangelism and bringing people in, but is that the only way that we're supposed to produce fruit? All right, I'm seeing some no's.
Strengthen yourself.
Okay, the fruit is that which is within as well. Huh?
Beatitude.
The Beatitudes. Galatians chapter 5, fruit of the Spirit.
And then it could go on to encouraging the other brethren inside the church.
That's right.
Not just gaining people.
Okay, the fruit does not just come from that which is outside coming in. Fruit has to begin here. And that I am being the kind of person that God wants me to be. Before we start bringing people in, we have got to start developing ourselves. And that's a factor that gets lost with what the work of the church is. What is being done here is for the purpose of edification, building us up, focusing on us. What do I need? Not that, oh, this would be good for this person to hear. No, what can I hear? And then be able to produce. So as we said, just pointing out further, the difference in the terminology, after a long time the Lord of those servants cometh, Matthew 24, a lot of the discussion is spent on how that this coming is near. These things are near. This generation shall not pass till these things come. So here we have, these things are not the same. We've now gone to near, to now he's a long time being gone. But when he comes back, as we said, an account will be given. He expects something of all of us. And these are all business terms that are being used. So when you're looking at this from the standpoint of it just simply being business, business is numbers, hard facts, bottom line. And that's what you have being illustrated here too. And because of this individual being of proper mindset, proper attitude, and responsible with what God has given to him, here's the response that he gets. And there was the animation I was looking for. Matthew 25:21. His Lord said unto him, Well done, thou good and faithful servant. Thou hast been faithful over a few things. I will make thee ruler over many things. Enter thou into the joy of the Lord. Here is what God demands and expects of us. Thou hast been faithful. Not perfect. Faithful. You have been diligent. You have been doing what it is that I left you behind to do. And that's tend to my things. So we're right back, Matthew chapter 6. Seek ye first the kingdom of heaven, and His righteousness, and all these things shall be added unto you. And there's something to show that we've done. Now, how many brethren are expecting to hear this? Well done, good and faithful servant. But then they do nothing in service of the kingdom. They're fooling themselves. Well, I was baptized for the remission of my sins. Okay. But where's your growth? Where's your production? What do you have to bring back to God to show to Him that you've been faithful? Well, I have what you gave me. It's not going to be good enough. Now here we're also being further illustrated, and we're being taught even further. Here Jesus is teaching works for reward. Is He not?
Yes.
And we've got a religious world around us that frowns upon doing any kind of work. But yet here's Jesus giving us the illustration of what is it going to be like in the kingdom. It's like servants in a master's house. And you are given things to do, and you need to be bringing in some income. Bringing something back. And he further illustrates that with this phrase here. I will make thee ruler over many things. Enter thou into the joy of the Lord. The word joy is chara, which is a cheerfulness of calm delight. And it fits into the illustration of a rest, which is what we all should be waiting for. While we're here on this earth, in the kingdom, in the church, what are we called to do? It's work, labor. But then when the time of reckoning, the time of account comes, and we're found faithful, then we get to enter into that rest. But we've got a lot of brethren trying to rest now so as to get to rest later. It's not how it works. Jesus said to His apostles in the account that John gives, they were commanded to work while it was yet day. For the night cometh when no man is able to work. Now is the time. And in view of what's being presented here, if I've not been busy, then now's the time to start. But then also notice this. Thou hast been faithful over a few things. But now that you have proven yourself, I gave you 5, you brought 5 more. I will now make thee ruler over many things. The responsibility grows. No one stays at the same level. Oh, well, I've hit this plateau, I'm not going any further. Nope. You've proven yourself here. Well, let's put some more on you. So when we are considering this, and we're thinking about it from the aspect of the apostles, and not just only the apostles, but even any other form of leadership that you would have. Eldership, deacons, teachers, preachers, evangelists. What do all of these elements need to recognize? You want to be a leader? You want to be somebody that everybody looks up to? You better get ready for the responsibility. And so many people want this, they want the recognition without actually putting in the effort.
Is that kind of a conundrum in a way? Why should you want that?
Exactly.
That's arrogance.
Exactly.
It's wrong. I mean, you should do it because that's what you earned as a Christian, because you accept that responsibility and you're continuing on instead of look at me.
And that's the catch-22 of it all. When we're looking and we're considering about these positions, it's easy to manipulate it. And that's what you're seeing with the Pharisees. Their position should have been exactly what is pictured here. These aren't your things. This isn't your house. This is God's house. And what is God's house supposed to be? It's supposed to be a house of prayer, but what did they do to it? They turned it into a den of thieves. When you have an individual, a person, who may meet all the qualifications on a checklist, let's say on a resume. Man, a resume looks good. But then what about the actual person himself? And you find out, well, okay, he checks all the boxes on a resume, but when it comes to his actual leadership ability, he's not cut out for this. And thus, one of the first qualifications for an elder is what?
Gotta want it.
To desire the work. And when you sit down and you realize what the work is, that you're herding sheep. And I'm so thankful for Pablo and his family that I've had just tiny bits of experience in doing that. That is not easy. And that's how we are illustrated. And then here's somebody stepping up, looking at that and saying, well, I've got to herd all of you. I don't know that I want that. And so you're right, it's that kind of person that is actually fit for the position. Why was Moses such a good leader?
Because he had Matthew 5:3. He was poor in spirit. He was the most humble man.
Moses gave every excuse that he could so as not to take it. But then God finally had to put a stop to that and say, hey, I know what I'm doing. And you're the one.
And then he's the meekest person other than Jesus.
And then he ends up being described as being the meekest man that ever lived. But then you look at individuals like Aaron. Aaron chose God, or excuse me, God chose Aaron for a work. He used to be high priest. But you see what jealousy and envy ends up doing? Well, that's still not up there with Moses. And so Aaron started trying to supplant. He started trying to surmise against Moses. Why? Well, I'm not in his position. You don't need to be in his position. And it showed he wasn't cut out for the position. But God still gave him something to do. And as being high priest, and that his family would be in charge of the priestly duties, and that was to guide the people into what was holy, unholy, clean, and unclean. They worked as go-betweens between man and God. So that's kind of getting ahead a little bit of where we're heading in our study. But what we're being shown from this parable also is do not despise the position that you're in. If you've been placed into a certain work and a certain duty of the church, then you do that. And do not start looking around at what other people are doing and that they are doing more or that they're doing more important work, and I'm putting parentheses, quotes around more important work than what you're doing, and then cause you to end up being bitter. Because that's ultimately what's happening with the apostles. All throughout this, they're arguing about what?
Who's going to be greatest?
Who's the greatest? Who's the most important? And then what's funny about that is if you really wanted to put a label and a title on the most important apostle, he didn't even come from within their group. It ends up being an outsider. Somebody that persecuted the church. And we have more written about him than any of the others. Shows you. So what should you be worried about? Yourself and doing what you need to do. So a bit of excursion, but it, like I said, it jumps ahead. So bringing us back to where we are here. In recognizing this, okay, the responsibility is just going to grow and grow and grow. Then okay, it's like what Jamie asked. Be careful what you wish for. You want responsibility? Okay, fine, we'll give you some responsibility. When you prove yourself, guess what's going to happen? Oh, you were able to do this? Let's put something else on you. That ends up becoming a trap. To where the person with these abilities and having more and more responsibility put it on them, what ends up happening?
They're overwhelmed and they can't do it.
All right, they can become overwhelmed. And they can become bitter and angry to what they have. So it goes back to, why are we doing this? It's like Jamie said, I'm doing this because it's the right thing to do. I'm going to be rewarded, yes. But let's set that reward to the side. Let's say there was no reward. As a servant, this is just my job to do. And that's what you have shown in Luke's account. What about the master that has his servant working out in the fields all day and then says to him, come and fix my table? And the master eats before the servant does, and he's been working all day. And that the servant doesn't do that for thanks. He does it because it's his job. Now with us, we need to make sure that we are thankful, that we're expressing thankfulness to one another. Because that's a huge part of this. But at the end of the day, that's not why we're doing it. That even Jesus himself taught, Matthew chapter 6. How are we supposed to do our good deeds? Well, okay, so Matthew 5, we are doing our good deeds so that men are able to see our good deeds and they glorify our Father. But then Jesus puts that in perspective in Matthew chapter 6 when he says, what about doing good deeds? Giving of alms, praying, you don't do it as the Pharisees, but how do you do it?
Behind closed doors.
You do it in secret. That your Father in heaven, who sees things in secret, will reward you openly. So there again is reward. There's appreciation. To where if I am involved in doing what I'm doing and I never receive a thank you while I'm here on earth, I can rest assured that my God will thank me, will reward me when this time comes. And so I don't give up. I keep going, and I keep pressing on. I keep forgetting about these animations. 17:23. Likewise, he that had received 2, he also gained other 2. He also that had received 2 talents came and said, Lord, thou deliverest unto me 2 talents. Behold, I have gained 2 other talents beside them. His Lord said unto him, Well done, good and faithful servant. Thou hast been faithful over a few things. I will make thee ruler over many things. Enter thou into the joy of thy Lord. It is still a double increase, but it still does not equal to the amount of the other servant. You are doing something. You brought gain, and that is great. Do not start beating yourself down just because what you brought in is not the same as the other person. That's comparing ourselves amongst ourselves. And Paul says we're not supposed to do that. That if you are being faithful with what your ability is, then rejoice in that. And use that as a platform to reach higher. Okay, I was given 2, I've gained 2 more. Let's see how much higher I can go. And this is the picture of how the church is. As I said, this is all about edification, building up, to where we are not supposed to be a group of Debbie Downers. We are not needing to look down on ourselves, but in fact to recognize our abilities and use our abilities. So it's still double, though it doesn't equal the same amount. You're doing something, and this shows that your gain does not have to be my gain in order to be rewarded. Notice the reward is the same. The exact same thing is said to this servant. Well done, my good and faithful servant. And the Lord, the master, does not make any type of comparison. Well, you didn't do as good as this other servant, but hey, we'll give you something. No. It's the exact same thing. You've been faithful over a few things, I'll make thee ruler over many things. Enter thou into the joy of the Lord. And the 5-talent man is not able to look down on the 2-talent man. Well, yeah, you brought in 2 extra, but I brought in 5 extra. We don't get to do that. Because we are all involved in the same work. If I bring in 5, Reese brings in 2, we are all benefiting. And that's the idea. We are working together, not against each other. This isn't a competition. I do not look down on the 2-talent person, and the 2-talent person shouldn't be trying to drag me down to where he is. But that's what ends up happening. And instead of rejoicing with each other, hurt feelings get in the way, and that 2-talent person ends up talking bad about the 5-talent person. And that's the kind of stuff that kills productivity. In the church, in business, anything else. Now, At this point, here is what this should do for all of us. And it's already been presented to us with the idea of faithfulness and not perfection. That every person, and that's supposed to be an animated GIF, every person should be able to breathe a sigh of relief. That Reese should not have to worry about trying to keep up with me and what I'm doing. That if he is faithful with his time and his abilities, and he is growing spiritually as he ought, then he will be rewarded just like I will. And you know what that does? That keeps down hurt feelings. That I do not have to be anybody else to be successful, and more importantly, to be faithful. That when I think about my shortcomings, my weaknesses, and my frailties, and that I can still be seen as being faithful. There are much better teachers and preachers out there than me. There are some that are better than me in evangelism. I struggle in just going out and striking up conversation with people. But I can't let those things weigh me down. I must still be faithful with what I have and with what I can do. And that I should not look at these others and the things that they're doing and start hating on them for what they can do and what I can't. The one was given 5 because he had the ability. The other 2, so on and so forth. And even the one talent man had ability that he should have used. But each one does not become afraid because the other brought more than he did. That when we stand before God in the reckoning, in the accounting, and I've got 50 and Jordan only has 30, he doesn't have to worry about that. As long as you're faithful. So we get the idea that if I cannot do something big in the kingdom, oh, I don't have 5, I only have 1. Therefore, what I'm doing is not important. That unless I'm doing something like what Micah is doing, then why do I need to do anything? That's the wrong way of thinking. And even with that idea, unless I'm doing something big in the kingdom, what is big in the kingdom? Twice, Jesus in illustration says what a person can do and receive a righteous man's reward. Jordan, you can't answer because we've already talked about it. What does Jesus say that a person can do and they'll still receive a reward?
Be faithful.
What is it?
Be faithful.
All right, be faithful, but we have further insight When we go back to Matthew 10, 41, 42. He that receiveth a prophet in the name of a prophet shall receive a prophet's reward. And he that receiveth a righteous man in the name of a righteous man shall receive a righteous man's reward. And whosoever shall give to drink unto one of these little ones a cup of cold water, only in the name of a disciple, verily I say unto you, he shall in no wise lose his reward. So I ask the question again. What is something big that we can do for the kingdom? Something as simple and as overlooked as giving a cold cup of water. Nothing is too small. So everybody has something they can do. But even in doing this, as we said, when you do this, what should that do? That should be an encouragement that, oh, I can do this, let's see what else I can do. So we need to stop beating ourselves down. That's not helping anyone. It doesn't help you. And then the person that needs the help, they don't get the help. Why? Oh, because I'm just not good enough. That's not the mentality we're supposed to have. And thus, when we're looking at this from the illustration of, there's no reason why anybody inside of the kingdom should have this idea that, well, I'm just left out. No, go and do something. And the idea that there's just nothing that you can do. Change your thinking. There are opportunities all around us. In John chapter 4, after dealing with the Samaritan woman at the well, the apostles come back, the whole city comes back out. And what does Jesus say about that scene? And the work that was there to do. See how the field is white of harvest, and the reapers are few. And if we are growing and producing spiritually, and I'm talking about within ourselves, I'm producing the Beatitudes, I'm producing the fruit of the Spirit, I'm striving to be recreated, regenerated into the image of Christ, then the opportunities are boundless for what a person can do. But brethren, get this idea. And to a large degree, the problem is, the problem within our brotherhood is an abuse of the system. That when we start thinking about those that are supposed to be doing things in the kingdom, who's the one person that comes in mind?
The one standing up there giving the lesson right now?
The one standing in front of everybody and who's being paid. But as Jamie said, I should be wanting to do this if I'm getting paid or not. And if that's not my mentality, then I don't need to be here. But throughout our brotherhood, there's a huge self-esteem problem amongst the brethren. Because they have this one person who's in a paid position, who is supposedly qualified above them, and he gets stuck doing everything. What do you think that does to the morale to the rest of the group? In the dumps. All of this is a balancing act. And then you have brethren that sit around and do nothing. And that's what they say about idle hands. Idle hands are the devil's playground. They're sitting around not doing anything. And then they start nitpicking at the ones that are doing. And that's part of the reason why you have preachers. The average span of time for a preacher in a local congregation is 2 to 3 years. And then they move to another congregation. And I think the reason for that is because one of my teachers in preaching school said it usually takes about 2 to 3 years to get to know people. That honeymoon phase wears off. And the curtain gets pulled back and you start being able to peep in and start being able to look in to see what's going on underneath the surface. And then the preacher just leaves. Either the members get tired of him or the preacher gets tired of the members. They move to the next spot, they're there for 3 years, and they do it all over again. There's plenty to do to keep a person busy. And especially if you're doing within your ability what you can do, and you just simply let others do what they are able to do. And what you will find is that you can do more than what you thought. And then you start doing more. But there's a danger with this sigh of relief that we want to deal with very quickly. And that's the one-talent man. We can get the idea that, okay, just because I don't have to be a Micah, Jordan, or a Reese, and that I don't have to produce the same amount that they have to produce, then we start getting lazy. We get too comfortable with that relief. And that's what the one-talent man did. But he that had received one went and digged in the earth and hid his Lord's money. So here's the problem. And we have shown to us as to why he did this. Then he which had received the one talent came and said, Lord, I knew thee that thou art a hard man, reaping where thou hast not sown, and gathering where thou hast not strawed. And I was afraid. And that's your Greek word. Phobeo. Where we get our English word for phobia. Phobia is an unreasonable, irrational fear. This isn't the reverential fear that we're supposed to have. This is terror. And this is how the servant saw his Lord. And went and hid thy talent in the earth. Lo, there thou hast that is thine. Now the question must be asked, where did this fear come from? It's in the text. I knew thee, that thou art an hard man. I believe Luke's account uses the word austere. Now, where did he get this idea? Because as we're going through our study, and this is a parable, this is an illustration of God and an illustration of Jesus, this is not the picture that I've gotten from Jesus. Now I know that God does not overlook sin, that God punishes sin, that God is just. But I also know that God is loving, that God is kind, and that God is compassionate to those who behave themselves properly. Why would the servant see his Lord this way?
Did his guilt convict him to think that way?
Do what now?
Did his guilt convict him to think that way, that he thought of himself as somebody in need of getting harsh treatment because he knew he wasn't doing what he was supposed to?
Could be guilt. Or at the end of the day, it could just be an excuse. Because in this parable, he's going to call them out. Lazy. Slothful. There should not have been anything to cause this servant to think that his master was going to be overbearing or just extremely harsh just for the purpose of it. That even if the master, so let's say, let's just paint this out. Here we have these servants, they're doing the work for the master. Let's say that there had been some occasion where the master had to discipline somebody. As we've seen with God and His discipline, yes, it may be harsh, it may be severe, but there's the opportunity for redemption. There's the opportunity for repentance. So even with that, this servant should have seen that and said, okay, even if I do mess up, I tried. And if I mess up, how will my master do with me? Okay, there may be some punishment, but I'll get to keep going. But he doesn't do that. Because of fear, he decided to hide it. And then he just simply tried to give to the master, hey, what you gave me is what I'm giving back. Doesn't work. And if we do not view our God in the right way, then this is what will end up being us. We won't love Him, we will fear Him, phobia, be terrified of Him. And that changes the relationship. And that's not what we're wanting. That's not what God's wanting. Yes, He wants us to respect Him, but ultimately what we're supposed to be doing is because we know that He loves us. And so, when we are thinking about in terms of conversion and having people obey the gospel, brethren, fear is not a proper response to the gospel. You have individuals that they will say, oh, well, I want to be baptized because I do not want to go to hell. That's not going to cut it. Because all that is going to produce is the one-talent man. That person that obeys because of this will be too afraid to do anything lest they be condemned. This is a part of it. This is a reality. But the whole point of the crucifixion and the whole point in the plan of redemption, in drawing men to Him, is based upon, first and foremost, this is an act of love. And second, there is condemnation if you will not receive it. And thus, we have within our brotherhood, we have brethren that when it comes to their Christian life, they walk around like a bunch of beaten kids. With a phobia of God. Not a view of Him as a loving, compassionate Father. This is not who we are. Fear breeds inaction. But love breeds action. You think about the apostles and what they were willing to do for the kingdom. They were not willing to be thrown in jail, to be beaten, to be persecuted, simply because of a fear of God. Fear doesn't do that kind of stuff. Fear runs away. They went through what they went through because they loved God. And because they knew that He loved them. And it's when we flip that script and when we flip that switch in our brains that things become better for us. That I don't have to walk around on eggshells, worried all the time. That I can go and that I can do things and try things and know that if I mess up, He will still be there for me. But because of this servant's action, his Lord answered and said unto him, Thou wicked and slothful servant, thou knewest that I reap where I sowed not, and gather where I have not strawed. Thou oughtest therefore to have put my money to the exchangers, and then at my coming I should have received mine own with usury. The fear you had should have caused more action. If this is true, then that shouldn't have caused you to hide. That should have produced more, but fear doesn't do that. You go all the way back to the garden. And when Eve ate of the fruit, gave to Adam to eat, and their eyes were opened, they hid themselves. Why?
Because of fear.
The text tells us because they were afraid. Fear cripples. But just as I mentioned, at the end of the day, all this is just weak excuses for not doing something. Well, I was afraid. Well, I got a new toothbrush, so I couldn't. One excuse is just good as another. What'd you say?
Laundry.
I wasn't going to do it. But here it is. When there are things that we ought to do, that we know that we should do them, then buddy, you better get up and do it. Without even having to be told. We are going to be held accountable for what we should have done, but we didn't. And when we're thinking about this idea of excuses, there's an illustration for that too. Luke 14:15, and when one of them that sat at meat with him heard these things, he said unto him, Blessed is he that shall eat bread in the kingdom of God. Enter into the joy of the Lord. Then said he unto him, A certain man made a great supper, and bade many, and sent his servant at supper time to say to them that were bidden, Come, for all things are now ready. And they all with one consent began to make excuse. The first said unto him, I have bought a piece of ground, I must needs go and see it. I pray thee, have me excused. And another said, I have bought 5 yoke of oxen, and I go to prove them. I pray thee, have me excused. And another said, I have married a wife, and therefore I cannot come. Excuse after excuse after excuse. And even some of these we might even think is being reasonable. Oh, well, a husband needs to tend to the affairs of his wife. Notice, another to that servant came and showed his lord these things, and the master of the house, being angry, said to his servant, Go out quickly into the streets and lanes of the city, and bring in hither the poor, and the maimed, and the halt, and the blind. And as we approach the scene that's going to be painted of the judgment at the end of Matthew 25, there will be no excuse of any value for why we were not faithful and active in the kingdom. Well, they have more ability. Well, they can present. Well, they can do, fill in the blank, whatever it is. And while you're complaining about what they can do, what are you doing? You're the one talent. You're hiding. You say of these individuals, say of them, well, they can. They can. And then what do you say of yourself? I can't. The only reason why you can't is because you won't. It's the only reason. The only thing stopping anybody from doing something is themselves. The 1 talent person could have gone to the 2 talent and asked him for advice. Hey, what can I do with this? What can I put this toward? So that when the master comes back, I'll have something extra to give him. But he didn't even do that. What Jesus is teaching here is the same problem that Paul was addressing with the Corinthians. Well, I'm of Paul. I'm of Cephas. Therefore, I'm better than you. I can speak in tongues. Well, I receive visions. Well, I dream dreams. Therefore, I'm better than you. Or, flip the script. Well, I can only do this. That means I'm not as good as them. Well, I'm the eye, and you're just the mouth. I'm more important than you are. And then the person that's the foot just simply says, well, I'm just the foot. What good am I? Who taught you to think this way? It's not the Bible. God's not teaching us to view ourselves this way. Take therefore the talent from him, and give it unto him which hath 10 talents. There again, emphasizing, you have ability, more ability is going to be put on you. So be careful what you ask for. When you prove to be faithful, more is given to you. Well, I want more to do, then start doing something. Prove yourself as being faithful, for unto every one that hath shall be given, and he shall have abundance. But from him that hath not shall be taken away even that which he hath. And cast ye the unprofitable servant into outer darkness, there shall be weeping and gnashing of teeth. This is going to be the destination for a whole host of our brethren. This is the destiny for every Christian that knows to do good and does it not. To him it is sin. James 4:17. Well, I can't do what they do. You don't worry about what they're doing. You do what's within your realm to do. And you grow from that. You work in your area, I can work in mine, and we can both get things done. And not be afraid to come to the other and say, hey, how can I improve on this? Can you teach me how to do this? I want to learn how to do this. We cannot meet Jesus with only that which He gave us at the start. There must be the production of fruit. But just like the parable of the sower, some will produce 30, some will produce 60, some will produce 100-fold. We're not all going to produce the same, but we need to produce something. And that should bring a whew. And it stops competition. Well, we're in competition with this congregation, that congregation. We need to try to get up to their level. Nope. Just do what we can do. And do what you can do. And then each of us will hear, well done, good, faithful servant, and we don't have to worry about this. So even with that, this element removes the fear of this. I don't have to live in fear of this if I'm doing what I'm supposed to do. The only reason why a person would be focused on this, you're already telling on yourself. The only reason why you would focus on this and be afraid of this is if you're not doing. So just start. Okay, and with that, that's where I was wanting to end. So I appreciate everybody bearing with me. Thoughts, questions, comments on the parable? All right.